we can go ahead and get started. Principal Gaston says she'll hop in. We're doing orientations for back in-person learning.
Oh boy. Okay. Are you back full time right now? Like
Our
everybody at once?
No, ninth grade come back Monday for 1 week, and then the 10, 12 will come back the following week.
1 week on, 1 week off kind of thing?
No, it's just staggered.
Okay. Okay. Let's do this. That way I can see what I'm doing here. Okay. So again, Fred will record this. Hi, Miss Hamilton. I'm Mitch Weathers. Nice to meet you.
Good afternoon.
What's your role at the school?
I'm the operations manager.
Okay. Nice to meet you.
You as well.
So I'm going to just give you two warning here. I'm going to jump into this and out of respect for your time, I know you got a lot going on. I'm just going to move really fast. Fred, if all goes well, I'll wrap up before you even have to go for what you're going to host here. If we need to stay on and do any Q&A, we can. But so I say that to just say, interrupt me. I'm going to move really quick. Not so much a training, but an introduction to the system. Are there any questions before I kind of launch into this for you all? No? Okay. So one thing, I'll speak to this kind of through both through a student lens and a teacher lens. We could also really talk about how this engages families or parents in a unique way. I hope what you get from this quick intro is this really is a content agnostic resource in that it can be used in any subject area. It's not aligned with an English class or a math class. And what it really is about is helping students develop the skills and habits that the research has shown really help them be more successful. So the non-cognitive skills and executive functions, but also recognizing that skills that were maybe historically picked up or learned by students on their own, that really it's on us as educators to not only teach these, but you see here this last sentence, all students need lessons in modeling of study and work skills like time and task management, note-taking, assignment completions, etc. So being mindful of that modeling aspect. But really what it boils down to is, this is a great report from the University of Chicago, and I can send you any of this research on the backside if you're just interested to look at it and read it on your own. But really about helping students develop these non-cognitive skills that when they do these executive functions, they develop more agency and more kind of acuity or dexterity in how they're approaching their learning, because they're getting clearer on how they as individuals learn. And in their toolkit, they have these strategies and habits that have been modeled. Now, we know this is true. The dilemma in the classroom really is, and this is true in distance learning or hybrid or when we're in the actual classroom, is just an issue of time, right? So if you could ask pretty much any teacher, and I've had the great privilege of working with schools and districts around the country, and what I typically hear is like, oh, this is everything I know I've needed to do, and I've done parts of it, but I've never been able to incorporate it all because we rarely have enough time as it is. And so what makes this program different is that there's no direct teaching of, say, goal setting or like Fred, you and I were talking about the exit tickets where they're working on retrieval practice and metacognitive strategies, or here's how you keep a calendar, time and like why it's important. There's none of that like direct teaching. It's all done through or incorporated into the predictable rhythm of the day. So the classroom or the learning procedures that students learn to depend on, and they create very predictable learning environments. And by virtue of that routine, you'll see in just a moment, students get practice with these skills and habits. And so it allows the teacher, one of the reasons this is really easy for a staff to adopt is that, looks like we have someone else dropping in here. Give me 1 second. Okay, Looks like they made it. So one of the, like I was saying, one of the ways this is makes it easier for a teacher to adopt is it doesn't cause them to completely reconfigure what they do as a teacher, which is important. Yet at the same time, it allows them to commit to or adopt common or shared classroom routines or protocols. And that's that predictability piece for students where they're spending less cognitive energy just navigating the school day. If class to class to class functions different, and then you complicate that with a hybrid schedule or distance learning at home. And what we found in the last couple years is that certainly during the pandemic, the same learning routines that promote learning in the classroom can be implemented or even should be implemented at home or provided at home for students in a hybrid schedule or in distance learning. So it's again, back to this last sentence, one unmistakable driver of students' achievement, carefully built and practiced routines. So I hope what you get from this is back to that content agnostic, any subject, any grade level can implement this, and it creates a predictable rhythm to the day. And by the virtue of that routine or rhythm, students get practice employing these skills that research shows moves the needle for them. So this is an organized binder. Each student would have one in their class. If with that comes, and again, I'm probably not going to speak a whole lot to the parent engagement piece, but in every organized binder, when they open it up, they would have everything they need in terms of for organized binder for the entire school year, as well as a bilingual parent guide. It's a Spanish-English translation. And that goes home as a way for parents to engage with what their students are doing with organized binder in the classroom. And again, we could talk about that another time. I'm going to spend most of my time on that kind of teacher and student lens because we're short on time. Inside one of those binders, you can see each of these colors. It aligns with these tabs that you're seeing. That's just for quick reference. And what I'm going to do for the sake of our time is I'm going to go through the aspects of organized binder that are used daily. And then at the end, very quickly, I'll talk about those that are used periodically. So, and I'll increase the size on these so you can see it in just a moment. But we begin each day or each class period or each learning session, if it's in a hybrid or distance environment, with something we call the kickoff. And we transition through these aspects of organized binder. And it's the first few minutes of class. And then we come back and we reflect. This would be, Fred, what you were talking about with your exit ticket. In organized binder, it's called a learning log. Same exact kind of rhythm or protocol. We can talk about that. But the important thing here is during this time, whether it's a student work session or they're in class where you're coming back next week, teachers get to teach their class. And that was my point, is it's the first few minutes and the last few minutes. And historically, that's some of the most underutilized class time or learning time. So if we can exploit that time for learning and teaching, and yet free up the teacher to continue to deliver their lesson as they intend, it's kind of a win-win. So if you were in my class, we're not going to do any role modeling here as we would kind of in a training, but this would be behind that B tab. Students would have 18 of these in each of their semester packets, one for each week of the semester. 18 is probably too many, and they're blank. They would go in and fill that B1, B2, B3. That B5 would represent the 5th week the system is in use. Maybe that's the 5th week of the school year. It doesn't have to be. This would be everything you're seeing right now that students would have in a physical form exists digitally, so teachers can implement it in the classroom or again in a distance scenario. But if you were in my classroom, I'd have this projected up for you, and as you walked in, it would be a nonverbal visual cue that in order to be considered on time, all you have to do is have your binder open to this page, okay? All of this is color-coded for visual cueing in the classroom. When I designed this years ago, I worked primarily with English learners. And so for those students who were struggling to kind of keep up, all the visual cueing was really helpful for them. This is true of special education students as well. And I would argue all students. So they walk into my classroom, this is projected for them, somehow up where they can see it. And then as students are starting to get ready before the bell rings or the class starts, all these binders are starting to open up. So let's say we're a class of 30, I have 29 visual reminders around me of what I need to do and what I'm accountable to do to engage with this learning community when we do begin. And I also have it up in front of me. And so we typically ask schools when we come in and train, like, how long does it take for a class to become kind of quote unquote academic after it begins or after the bell rings? And it's not uncommon to hear like, oh, 1 or 2 or 3 minutes. With this program, with Organized Binder in place as it's intended to be used, it's about 1 or 2 or 3 seconds. And if you start to do the math on even just 1 minute routinely wasted in a class over a course of a school year, it's pretty remarkable how much time can be lost. And it's also where management issues can really breed. And so if we can just what we call paint the gray areas in our lessons black and white, so there's more clarity for students and back to that predictability. I'm a real believer in that those predictable routines that utilize time create safer learning environments. So if you were in my class, let's say your school starts with a bell and the bell rang, I would then show some type of prompt, and we call this a kickoff. And we also call it a prompt on purpose. And the kickoff comes from kind of the analogy of helping students understand that at the time when I was designing this, a lot of my students played soccer. I play soccer. It could be any sport that has kind of a starting, that there's this whole warm up, there's this getting ready. And when, let's say, a football game starts, and you have to be ready to go before then. So you're getting your gear on, you're warming up, you're blah, 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 doing all this, and then you're ready. And it became clear to me with the students I was working with when I was first designing this, that like, oh, you don't get this. You don't get that the same is true for learning. How do you know when you are ready to engage? So I'm going to give you some cues about what that looks like, and you're going to practice being ready. So if that means getting your binder, opening this page, checking in with me, or talking to a classmate, sharpening your pencilers, all of these things. And then my expectation is now we're going to start. And when we start, I'm showing you a prompt. That's on purpose, that language, not a question. If when this formerly was said question and answer and kids interpreted it as a quiz, and kind of that test anxiety would come up. So this is just a kickoff. We're just getting going on the class. And the prompt typically is a moment to reteach and revisit what we did the previous time I saw you, whether that be class period. And Fred, you were saying, I think it's 1 week on, 1 week off. This becomes that much more important because what I want to do is come back to, here's this standard or objective that I really needed you to grasp and understand in our previous lesson before we move on to this lesson. And so what it does for me, obviously a chance, an authentic moment to reteach and clear up misconceptions. And what it ends up being for students is really a safety net. They know that if they struggled last class, maybe if the teacher does assign homework, maybe they had some trouble there, that before anything happens, we're going to pause. And it's kind of like, I got you. Like, here's what we need. Where are you stuck? And the skill in designing these prompts can really elicit those misconceptions and clear them up. And research is clear that if students can articulate what they think the answer might be or the response, and let's say it's wrong, they're more likely to clear up their misconceptions if they articulate that first. And then we have this dialogue around reteaching. The point I'm trying to make here is it's not a quiz. It's just a kickoff. It's okay to get it wrong, okay? And we do that every single day. We start this rhythm every single day, however it is. If it's a bell that's starting class, we start with this kickoff prompt, a reteach, clear up misconceptions. Students are writing these down and recording their response. So if this was the 5th week of school and we're nearing, let's say, the end of our first unit, or we're halfway through, Fred, I think what you called a marking period or a learning period, I could have as many as 25 standards aligned prompts with the responses that I could use as a student to learn to kind of gauge where I'm at in my understanding. So that's self-assessment, but also a resource that I can use to learn to study from. And every 9 weeks, when your interim assessments happen, Fred, you were talking about the reflection piece as kind of benchmarking daily to that interim assessment. What these kickoffs can do at the beginning of the class, and we'll talk about the end in just a moment, can really be those prompts that are aligned to those assessments. So when I get to week 9, I could have 45 prompts with the responses that I can use to study from for those interim assessments. And it's mine, it's in my binder. I wrote it down, I responded, and I can tell you, when students see that this is aligned to something that is as weighty as that interim assessment, the engagement factor goes way up on these kickoffs. And we can talk about that further if we want to go deeper. Again, this is meant to just be a reteach. It's not a quiz. Students are recording it. These are just some shots from classrooms. It could be pair share. It could be anything the teacher wants to do with it. It is this way to kick off the learning session. Okay. By the way, they don't all have to be written. They could be drawings. We have schools that act them out. I mean, there's all kinds of really creative things that can happen. And I draw your attention to, you can see one down in the bottom right-hand corner, that check box. It has a 5 there. When this reteach time is concluded, when the kickoff is done, what teachers would say, most of us are saying, is now check yourself. And it's a simple self-assessment. 1, I'm completely lost. 5 is I got it. And a lot of teachers already do this in class. It's a quick check. This is completely private for students. They're writing it down. And in our trainings, anyone that trains for us is a practicing teacher that uses the system, and they have classroom video of themselves using it. You would see educators walking around, and as students are checking themselves, they get a quick but authentic formative assessment about where everybody is in alignment with this kickoff. And they may have thought, you may think, I gave the greatest lesson last Friday, and you're in class on Monday, and everyone who was there is going to be a 4 or 5, and you're noticing like a lot of 1s and 2s. And it's that immediate, private, but formative feedback that we need ongoing to kind of pivot and adjust for who's in the room and authentically teach them. And for students, I really believe in this self-assessment. And you'll see them like staring up at the ceiling and thinking about it. It's those moments of cognition that are important, but it also creates a learning environment where it's okay to be a 1 or a 2. I tell my students this all the time. Like, of course, I'd love for you to all be a 4 and a 5, but if you're a 1 or a 2 and you're kind of feeling lost or confused, 1, that's okay. And 2, I really need to know that. That's helpful for me as the instructor of the course. And so it subtly, and I make it very overt, communicates to students that learning is a journey. It's not binary. It's not like I got it or I don't. And I think students interpret it that way. And this creates it like, hey, this is where I'm at today. And I'm getting better at understanding when it is that I've got it. Because when I learn something, it looks different from anybody else. Okay, so these are the kickoffs. They all end up back in their binder behind this B tab. So if you think about that, if you really did have an 18-week semester, they could have as many as 18 of these, which would be times 5. And it can be done at home on a hybrid schedule. If you're home for a week and back, same learning routine. And they're building basically a study guide for the entire semester. And then in June, at the end of the year, they could have a study guide or a portfolio of these from the first day of school till the end. It's really powerful. We typically go to this agenda and table of contents, but since we are on this weekly lifeline, let's just talk quickly about the end of class. This is your exit ticket that it sounds like you're already doing. This would be a perfect place for it to be recorded. Many schools that we've worked with transition to the learning log. You can call it an exit ticket, but an exit ticket that we've seen historically is on a separate piece of paper that gets handed to the teacher, and they collect them all and hopefully get a chance to read them every day. But the reality is we may not have enough time to do that. And then the question is, where do they go beyond that? What happens to these reflections once the teacher has them on the little piece of paper? And these may be things that your school has thought through. But I'll tell you about our learning log. Here's some basic, very simple prompting that's on the backside of this weekly lifeline. And students, in the same way, are just reflecting in this learning log space. You can see the kickoff and then the learning log. The kickoff is a reflection usually of the previous day. The learning log is a reflection on what I've learned or engaged in or what's confusing me from today, the stuff we did today. So we begin and end with reflection or retrieval practice. And in our guide, we have a guide for educators, the guide for parents that goes home. We actually provide pages of these prompts because the quality of the exit ticket or the kickoff response, and again, even if it's fully in alignment with that interim assessment, is really about the quality of the prompt that the teacher creates. And we spend quite a bit of time on that in our training. So this is kind of a starting place for students or for teachers. And as your exit ticket, I can say this about the learning log. The way we communicate it to students is that this is a one-on-one private conversation between you and I. And so please just be honest with me and communicate, and I'm going to communicate back. Even if it was a self-contained upper elementary class, let's say, and there's 28 kids in a classroom, realistically, it's hard to have those one-on-one conversations every single day ongoing. And with this learning log or your exit ticket, you all know that that can actually happen if we have it in the written form. And it's a powerful form of communication with the student, and they really rely on it if they know the teacher's reading it. And so for us in the learning log, I'm going to keep just drawing you to bits of these quotes for the sake of time, that elaboration is the process of giving new material meaning. Okay, so the stuff I learned today, I'm expressing it in my own words, okay, my voice, not the teacher's, and connecting it with what I already know. In a sense, that's our learning log, that exit ticket. Like, how do I start to put that all together? And that's heavy lifting. That's not easy to do. And that's why it's a daily routine. It's practice with these skills. Liberating education consists in acts of cognition, not transfers of information. So if by virtue of our rhythm, by virtue of the learning routine, I start with a moment of cognition and reflection, that kickoff, I end with this moment of cognition. It's not just about me transferring what you need to know, which is part of the job of a teacher, of course, but building in these moments of cognition every day for students to practice. This is as well, both the kickoff and the learning log. In order to transform learning, we must focus on getting information out, a strategy called retrieval practice. That's the kickoff and learning log. Tell me what you're learning, tell me what's confusing you. And then the caveat here is that regardless of the subject area, okay, remember this is an agnostic, content agnostic system, that students practice academic English or whatever language is being used in the course. So you're not texting to me, you're not even emailing to me, Snapchat, whatever it is. In this class, in this moment, even if it's one sentence every day, and I'm going to prompt you and you're going to respond to that prompt, but I want you to practice your academic English. And so now what happens school-wide, it's not just in the English class anymore, that in math and in science and in electives and even in PE, there's this expectation and reteaching and reinforcing of academic language that can really help with students. And then it really all kind of boils down to Marzano's work about exposures, because that is where the retrieval practice comes in. And his work is saying, you know, teachers exposing students to details multiple times, at least 3, ideally no more than 2 days apart. And it can't just be like, hey, remember this, we did this. It's this working memory. It's by virtue of the routine. So if you think about it with organized binder, I give my lesson, that's the first exposure. And for your exit ticket or learning log, second exposure at the end of the class or the learning period. If you give any homework for practice for students, be the third exposure, and you come back to me, let's say on Tuesday, 24 hours later, and the moment we begin, we go right back to that thing, okay? So by virtue, and teachers don't even have to try it, it's just virtue of routine. There's at least 4 exposures that are a no stakes assessment. You can get these wrong and it's okay. It's just about that retrieval practice. And I can say this through the teacher lens, what this requires is that teachers are laser focused on the objectives of every one of their lessons. And that matters, because if I'm going to ask you a prompt on Tuesday that distills down the concept or the objective or the standard from Monday, I need to be crystal clear on that. And so if I'm not as the teacher, it's likely that students aren't either. So it encourages good teaching or best practices, again, by virtue of routine, this kickoff and learning log. So we begin and end with retrieval practice. I'm going to pick up the pace so that, oh, Fred, I'm not going to make it by 11:30. I apologize if you're still here. But this retrieval practice is how we begin and end.
That's fine if you can keep going, because the principal, she's going to watch it later, and if I can come back on after, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
doubt, yeah, how long is your session? I have a feeling we'll be done before. Then we'll probably go another 10 or 15 minutes max.
yeah, it's going to be until 12.
Okay. Um, well, what I'll do is I'll throw this up online and then just share the link with you and you can share it out on the backside.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. Ms.
Yeah.
Hamilton is still here, and she'll probably have some questions too.
Okay. Thanks, man. So I'm going to go back to the beginning of class real quick. And again, my apologies for just talking at you. I don't like doing this, but trying to respect your time. We would begin at that kickoff, and then when students check themselves, that's also a transition. Once they've written that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in that checkbox, then we transition to this agenda and then the table of contents. And in terms of collecting the data, Fred, that you and I have talked about, these two pieces are really, really integral. And so as soon as we've done the kickoff every day, we simply turn to an agenda. And all this gives me as a teacher a chance to kind of introduce the lesson. Students are recording it. Of course, if they miss class, they would know what we did. And that's fine, and that's quick, and we move on, okay? But the real point of this is teaching students and modeling for students the skill of maintaining a personal calendar. And if I could try to explain this, what we would do in our training with your teachers is say, okay, it is important to introduce the lesson. That's that predictability. And a chance to talk about the homework. All of that's good. It also is a little bit of time for teachers to walk around while students are recording this and they're introducing the lesson. They can hand papers back. They can check in with students. It's kind of a time for them, input their attendance or whatever. But then we would encourage, and they don't have to do this every day, but on occasion, pick a larger upcoming kind of weightier assignment. So it might be like this lab report in a science class and say, hey, we're going to do this really fun cardiovascular lab. We're going to look at a heart this week. And then next week, we're going to work on our lab report. But we know, because if we look at our syllabus, this is where our training comes in, it's due next Friday. So let's write that on our agenda because that's what people do who keep a calendar. And they're modeling it. The students are writing it down, teachers putting it on there. And they might joke and something like, hey, I'm not going to give you any homework the Thursday night before because I want you to finalize your lab report. So let's write that on our agenda because that's what people do who keep a calendar. We actually don't call this a calendar on purpose, trying to make that distinction. And then you move on. It's that quick. Move on to the table of contents. The next day we would kick off. Students check themselves. We turn to the agenda. Turn to the agenda. Every day it's that same predictable rhythm. And each day I'm going to be reminding them, oh, don't forget in a couple of weeks here. And at the very least, students aren't going to be surprised that this lab report or this essay, or maybe it's the interim assessment. Maybe that's the 9th week. They're not going to be surprised that that's coming up. And at the very most, they're going to start seeing this skill, time and task management. And I can tell you this, the colleges we work with, this is the skill, this idea of unpacking a syllabus and mapping it out for the semester that most trips up or inhibits students new to college. And so they really enjoy this because it now gives professors a chance to say, okay, here's my syllabus, but here's this agenda. Let's map out the semester real quick. And then you can put that on a personal calendar. So it's just modeling it and kind of chunking it for them. And then ideally what would happen is whether it be our planner or if you already have a school planner, that in every class, we would then have the conversation about, okay, here's what we've just talked about. What from today's agenda needs to go in your planner? Oh, and we wrote that thing that's coming up in 2 weeks. Let's flip the page and write that down so that they start to get this practice with this whole idea of time and task management. So I just wanted to make that clear that this agenda is about making a plan for the day, which is important for predictability, students knowing what's coming at them. But it's also this making a larger plan, and that helps with kind of that agency, if you will. Like I feel like I can kind of like grab hold of my experience in this class and how I'm going to approach it because I have a plan, what's coming at me. Okay. So back to the beginning, we would start with that kickoff, check yourself, usually just quickly update the agenda for the day. Every once in a while, do that modeling. And then we turn to the table of contents. And this I'm really excited to introduce to you for this whole idea of data collection and students having really a wherewithal, like where they are in the process of their learning, as I'm understanding it from Fred. So we would have kickoff agenda. And then we update the table of contents. And if I was to go back to that kickoff and agenda, our hypothetical school day here is September 14th. And then in most cases, a teacher teaches their class. So if they're short on time, that kickoff could be condensed. If they have a little bit more time, they could have a kind of a longer reteach there. Quick check on the agenda, quick update the table of contents, and then I can dive into my lesson. Next day kickoff, if you would just kind of follow this date column here, all hypothetical, of course. We don't encourage or promote that teachers update this all at once. And the reason for that is Organized Binder, I hope you're starting to see, gives a framework to structure the daily lesson plan, which is of course really critical, that its objectives are standard aligned, that we're explicit about that we have really predictable learning routines, that it allows for retrieval practice, and all of this stuff that I'm introducing on a daily basis. But the other thing that maybe is a little bit subtle is that this also structures a teacher's unit lesson planning. And everywhere I've been around the country, every teacher at any level I've met, we all teach through some type of thematic unit of curriculum. And again, that could be chapters in a math book, it could be historical events, scientific phenomena, of course, novels, whatever. It's a lens through which we design these units, and hopefully our standards and objectives align. And I get better as a practitioner year after year after year if I can look back on both my daily lesson planning and my unit sequencing. That's why we have a class sample binder. Every teacher would have their own sample binder that they're modeling for students. It takes them just a few minutes a day to create. But if we were to go back here, I would have kickoff, check yourself, we're starting a new unit. Students have multiples of these behind the G tab. And I would introduce the unit. I would probably have some essential guiding questions here, get the curiosity going, and then say, okay, here's what we're going to do today. And it might be something that they take out of a consumable. It might be something that they create on binder paper or line paper, or something I copied and give to them. They write it down, the date and the score, and then we move on to the lesson. Next day, here's a couple things. You can notice that heart diagram doesn't even have any point value, but it's part of our unit, because although my daily lesson plan is important, this sequencing is just as important. So each day students are recording what they're creating or being given. And then when they earn a score, if it has any point value, they're responsible for recording that score. And what ends up happening, and I love online grade books, but I can't tell you how many times personally, and when we ask teachers, how often students are like, well, why do I have this grade in the class? And it's like, well, you can access that on your phone or on your computer, or your parents can, but oftentimes they don't, or they don't with like regular kind of consistency. And when students every day write down their score, so let's say, I'll just pick one here, I'm handing back number 9, that quiz, the next day. They took it on the 25th and they got 5 out of 15. They write that 5 down. And all of a sudden it starts to kind of connect for students, like the effort and the energy that I'm putting into this course has a direct impact on my overall grade and how I'm doing. And what I do, not so much just like making that connection, which I think is really important, but also then I can say, wow, I don't have this. I need to reach for help. I need to see the teacher, whatever that looks like. But I'm very intimately aware. I'm collecting data on my performance, and we'll talk about aligning that to the goals in just a moment. But just by this simple recording, this just becomes a cover sheet. Any of these, if I could draw your attention to these numbers here, they just get written in the upper right-hand corner. Very low tech, very simple. Again, could be line paper. Each, there's a semester 1 packet and there's a semester 2 refill packet. Each of those comes with 50 sheets of binder paper or loose leaf paper. And our goal with that is through kind of an equity lens, is that outside of the content and what teachers are being creative and creating for their classes, we want everything in the binder for them. So they wouldn't have to go buy their binder paper. They wouldn't have to go buy those dividers. They don't have to buy a binder, like it's all provided for them. And they can just engage with the curriculum. So it could be something that was copied or taken out of consumable. all they're doing is writing that number so that when they flip through here, and when I'm checking their binder for organization, G1 would represent the first unit of the school year. I could just flip behind there and I would see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And what this is really interesting, actually, even though they're writing this down and they're recording their score and they're kind of like, they're involved with what they're doing, they know when they're missing something now. So they'll flip through and it'll be number 1, number 2, number 3, and they don't have number 4, and hands start going up, students start coming to see me. And it might be because I collected it and I haven't returned it. It might be because they didn't do it, or who knows. The important thing is they're now aware of the fact that it's missing, and they want to know why. They want it in this, behind this table of contents. And one of my favorite things with this system is that when we get to the end of any unit, now those units could be 9 weeks long with your interim assessment. You could chunk 3, 3, 3, so you have 3 units per learning period before those assessments. It doesn't really matter, it works with any time frame. But when we get to the end of the unit, that table of contents becomes a cover sheet of sorts, and we staple all of the work that they've done behind the cover sheet, and they have a unit packet. They turn to a new table of contents, we start a new unit. There's 2 things I really like about that. One, every 3 or 4 weeks, or depending on the kind of the rhythm of the teacher's class, there's kind of this new beginning. So we can stand back and look at our unit, and maybe they earned 60% of the points or 95% of the points. And we can have a conversation about how that has an impact or is influenced by the goals that we set, which again, I'll talk about in a moment. So there's kind of this new beginning. Okay, you didn't do that well in this unit. Let's figure out maybe why, and let's approach the next unit in a smarter way, maybe, or with a new plan. But we're starting over. There's kind of this breath of fresh air. And then when we get to the end of the learning period, I think is what you call them, forgive me if that's wrong, and they're approaching this interim assessment, and I'm just going to make this up, that's 9 weeks long, and let's say a teacher designed 3 units of curriculum leading up to that interim assessment. Students would have everything that they've created or been given neatly curated in standards or objectives aligned unit packets to study from for that interim assessment. In addition, they have all of those kickoff and learning log prompts in their binder that they can look back and study or learn to study from. So just by virtue of the routine, this rhythm to the day, we start creating really robust resources for students to develop these non-cognitive skills or executive functions that I mentioned. And then take that out. This is 2 of my students a few years back studying for a final exam in June, and they have everything that they've done from the first day of school in August to the last day in June, that they've created a portfolio of their effort and their learning in my course from the day 1 till the final that they take with them. Not only is it empowering them to be successful on the final, I don't even call it a portfolio anymore, I call it a trophy. And I'll say this, we're not talking about grades. I don't even remember. Hopefully they were really, really successful, but these students, let's say, could have a C or C- in my class or anywhere, and you're still part of our learning community and accountable for this routine. So you're getting practice with all this, and it's not just the straight A kid who has a perfectly organized binder. And so they have these, and they all end up in their binder. Again, they get to take it with them, and it really does become this, there's a sense of pride in what they've created, and they can start to see themselves as a scholar, maybe for the first time, maybe if they've struggled historically. And again, they could be struggling with the content of that course, but they still have this evidence of their learning and effort and the data of that they can reflect back on. Now, every once in a while, you don't want something trapped in those unit packets. This is their toolkit. This is a really critical distinction for, I would say, teachers, but certainly students to make. Not everything is just work in the class that's part of a unit. Some things we have are tools or resources that I'm going to use from unit to unit to unit all school year. And so those need to be in my toolkit that I can just open up real quick and access and use to be more successful. So slightly different assignment here. Still a point value, can still be in the grade book, but they're these tools. And this is where it's really fun in our trainings to sit with either subject area groups or grade level teams, or even a whole staff, and say, okay, what are the school goals, or what are these interim assessments? How do they influence the tools that students are equipped with to be successful? Because it's not just about the content. There's these other pieces too. And so they go here for quick reference, and it can really inform those kind of PLC discussions. And I enjoy, if it's this time of year and I'm about to set up a lab report in March here in a little bit, I can tell all of my students, hey, turn to F1 real quick. And we're going to look at those Cornell notes you took on the scientific method in August. We're going to review how you set up a hypothesis. And everybody in the class flips to that F tab, opens up their notes, and it's those scholarly skills that they're developing just by virtue of kind of the routine. So again, kickoff, agenda, table of contents, that's your typical beginning of the day. On occasion, you'll reference or add to your toolkit. And then you teach your class. And then at the end, we have this reflection, the last few minutes of class, and they move on. Again, that's important, and there's a lot of value in that for teachers. Further aspects, I'm just going to mention these real quick. Not spend as much time, but the first page in Organized Binder is their goals for each course. It's gold because we want them going for the gold. And we try to make it really, really simple. There's some really good and powerful goal setting strategies out there, like SMART goals. And we encourage teachers to use those in conjunction with this. But this makes it really simple on the entire thing. We spent a good chunk of time on this in our training because it's so important. And so few schools or young people set goals. And when you ask a staff, oftentimes adults rarely set goals. And so the point of ours, and we was telling Fred earlier, we call it a term to keep it really general. But if it were those 9-week chunks at your school, it's not like I'm setting my goal for the whole year. It's like, okay, these 9 weeks, what's that look like? And so this is meant to be a class discussion, and it's very simple. What's the most important thing? Let's say your first quarter goal is to pass the class. Great. What's the most important thing? And we have a discussion. This is a class discussion. And I always tell students that because some students have never done this. Others may not realize, well, if I just do all of my homework, or if I stay organized, or I come to class on time, or I come to school, if I pay attention, these very simple strategies can make a profound difference in my success. They may have never thought about it. So if you share what you think is the best strategy or what you do, that could be really helpful for someone else in the class. And the point is, we're trying to get to this daily task. So I want to know when and where. It's got to be an action. This is not like goal setting, like pie in the sky. If I have a struggling student, I'm going to be really focused on right here. You're telling me that when you get home from school, you're going to sit down at the table and do your work. And if you do your work, you're more likely to pass my class. So when I see you, I'm just going to keep asking you about that. I'm going to communicate to your family or your parents, and hopefully they're going to ask you about that, and maybe other stakeholders. I now have this very tangible action item that I can encourage you on, and we can measure against. So when I'm going through those kickoffs and learning logs, when I'm recording my table of contents and my scores, or when I get to the end of my unit packet, all lining up to those interim assessments, we're constantly coming back to this page. And is there evidence that this is working? In every learning period or quarter, we have a deliberate reflection there. You can see, did I accomplish this? Did it work? And what's the data? What's the evidence around that? From my binder, from right here, that I can see and look at. Again, not something that's super cerebral. We want it to be very concrete and tangible. So your goal setting now becomes, it's the first thing you see when you open your binder, and it's a working part of the class. Periodically throughout the learning period or the semester, we have a binder check. Teachers have a class sample binder, super easy. If you think about Organized Binder, we start class together, we update the agenda together, the table of contents, toolkit, we end together, we set goals together, everything is done together. So it's pretty easy to stay organized, but this is not uncommon where things kind of start to come off the rails. And so what we want to do is with that class sample binder is just say, hey, your binder needs to look like my binder. And I'm going to give you, in our parent guide, as well as the teacher guide, there's something called the peer self-check. And ideally, students trade binders. Some don't want other people seeing their binders, so they'll do the self-check. But usually we trade them before the binder check. And they go through and they just find anything that needs to be fixed. Again, no stakes at this point. I'm just finding, here's what you need to fix. This is missing, this hole's torn out, et cetera, et cetera. Then they give it back to the student and they get to fix all of those mistakes before I come around and quickly check your binder that it looks like mine. And the reason we do this, one, is it reinforces for students organization or lack thereof, seeing it in someone else's binder. And two, and more importantly, I want them to have that portfolio at the end of the school year. I want them to walk with that. And if I allow for this to just slowly turn into this, and it just turns into a mess, then it's on me, when I could have just paused every 3 or 4 weeks. And as a class, we spend a few minutes putting them back together. It's really important. There's a place for their syllabus. That's tab E. This is an optional page. Most K-12 schools are using it. This is not a nurse's pass or a school pass. Think of this as kind of like currency. It's all about not self-motivation, regulation, sorry, self-regulation. And so the idea here is they could go to their locker or their water fountain or the bathroom, or it's theirs to use at an appropriate time. But what most teachers do is they, any of these that are left unused at the end of the semester are worth one missing homework assignment. So it has a little bit of weight to it. Nothing significant in terms of really moving the grade, but it allows for that. Do I need to use this? Because that's something that research is also very clear about, this whole idea of being able to self-regulate. And I know for a lot of us too, it's just a way of monitoring how many times someone is leaving the class. Again, if it's applicable to your setting. I'll end with this, and then I'll see if you have any questions, because it really does come down to DWEC and developing mindsets. As we raise standards in our schools without giving students the means of reaching them, it's a recipe for disaster. Just pushes the poorly prepared or poorly motivated students into failure and out of school. So scaffolding up for them and building this trophy can have a profound impact. All right. I told you I would talk at you this whole time. I appreciate you hanging with me here. Do you have any questions? Anything
I don't necessarily have any questions, Mr. Holmes, and Ms. Gaston will most likely have questions.
Okay.
Actually more academically. My only thing, when you get a moment, you can send, we have about 650 students right now. Next year, projected to have 725 scholars. So if you could, when you provide a price quote, I would say for 730 scholars for the quote. We've never had many students, so I doubt we go over.
Congratulations on the growth, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, last year we were right at 600, and so this year we have 50. Next year we expect to have a couple more.
I'll on the backside do the math. All of those binders are shipped in class sets of 40. So I'm trying to do the math real quick. 40 into 7, whatever's closest to 730 will be that. Now let me ask you this: how many classes would you envision? And if you don't know the answer, we can certainly chat via email. But in how many classes do you think students would use an organized binder?
They would definitely need it in all of their core classes. I could see that.
Okay.
So, math, English, science, social studies, so 4 classes.
Okay.
Rest, elective classes like PE, music, art. So it may not necessarily be a need as much for those classes, but it's something I can definitely see them using in all of their core classes.
Okay. So what typically happens with a school or a network is we start with that focus on the core classes. Of course, everybody can be a part of training and professional development. And then if anybody else opts in, we just kind of address that at that time. So what I'll do is we'll do the 7:30 at 4 classes, and I'll have that worked up, and then this will get uploaded, and I'll just send, I think I have everybody's email. Should I send it to everybody or just to Fred?
Yeah, if you send it to him, he can get it out to everybody else.
Okay, I will do that. It'll realistically be in a few hours. I know you're all busy too, so.
That's fine, no rush. I wasn't even
Okay.
expecting you to say today. I thought you were gonna say tomorrow.
It could be. We'll see how the day goes, but I appreciate that. And thanks for your time. I wish we had
You're
more time
welcome.
to dialogue, but I hope I gave you enough to kind of chew on and think about.
Yeah, and I just texted Ms. Gaston. She said she's gonna go back and review the recording.
Okay. Well, let's stop then so it's not too long for her.
Okay.
I'll see you later. Thanks again.
All right, thank you. You're welcome. Bye.